Good evening, Janina. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the welcome to the webinar entitled as Land Tenure Reform in Africa and its implication to landscape restoration on the continent. This webinar it will be now it has just started and it will continue about 1 hour and 10 minutes. Welcome everyone. My name is Takanori Oishi. I am a lecturer at African Studies Center at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, which is located in Tokyo. Today, we are connected with among three locations. One is here, Tokyo, and another is from Yaoundé, Cameroon, and another location from Accra, Ghana. And we have three principal reporters from Japan and Ghana and from Ethiopia. And then we have two commentators. One is from Cameroon and one is from Ghana. I like to just explain in the subject of this webinar. In Africa, we can observe the very big impact of the land reform policy in the many African countries. This same webinar is focusing on their impact on the landscape the change, and in the context, especially referencing to the landscape restoration on the continents. So now I would like to go to the presentation by the first speaker. First speaker is Dr. Shinichi Takeuchi, who is the director of African Studies Center of Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. He's basically his major is political economy. So now I would like to give the microphone to Dr. Takeuchi.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, but maybe you are good morning. And would you prepare? Would you have PowerPoint? I'd like to talk about my presentation using the PowerPoint. And it's okay. I don't see, but maybe can I start? This is, yeah. Please put my PowerPoint. Yes, that's mine. Okay. So I will talk about Rwanda's land law reform, its implications for the landscape change. So please, next slide, please. I'll talk about the landscape and land policy relationship between the two. And landscape can be significantly changed by land policies. And actually, in many African countries, we can see such a remarkable change. And many African countries have launched land tenure reforms since the 1990s. And also, international donors have actively supported these reforms. And the global background is that the Cold War has ended, and the influence of liberal democracy has a strong impact on these policy changes. And I think it is very important to examine the consequence of these land reforms, because even if background is very similar, the consequence is very varies one country to another. So it is important to examine the consequences on the basis of detailed case studies. That is what we are trying to do. And today's my presentation is a part of this research project. And next slide, please. Next slide, please. So today I talk about Rwanda. And with regard to Rwanda, there are two important legal changes. First is the 2004, the national land policy was established. And then the next year, in 2005, new land law has been adopted. And following these two land law and policy reform, Rwanda adopted a very radical policy measures aiming at promoting commercialized agriculture. Two major policies can be indicated. One is crop intensification program, which is promoting the commercialized crops with improved seeds and fertilizers. Government assisted systematically the farmers for promoting the commercialized crops. And the other one is land use consolidation. This is a very big impact on rural area because the government orders the farmers produce the same crop in unificating fragmented fields. So Rwanda is a population abundant country, and lands are generally very fragmented and scarce. But under this land use consolidation, farmers are ordered by the government to unify their lands and produce the same crops determined basically by the government. So next slide, please. These are photographs that I took in 2003 and 2015. The left-hand photo in the same place. The left-hand photo is in 2003. And this is a wetland between the valleys. And the farmers use the valleys as they like, and they produce a crop according to their needs. But right-hand side photo is that I took in 2015. These valleys are completely changed and converted to the rice fields. And rice fields are technically supported by the government, and crops are produced through the cooperatives. And this change are very remarkable. People are organized under the cooperatives, and landscape are significantly changed. So next slide, please. And so what are implications of the landscape change? I think important points are twofold. First is, of course, it's a development of commercialized agriculture. It is very clear. And production is actually increased. In the statistic of Rwanda government shows a clear increase of the agricultural production, but the number of varieties of crops are decreased because government restricted the species of crops, and only 6 crops are supported by this program. So before, farmers put their different crops for their subsistence purpose, but today the number of crops are decreased. And also remarkable change is influx of money into rural area. Rural farmers can get money as using the land certificate as collateral, so they can get money. So this is also different change. And second point I would like to raise is that this is a process that's to strengthening the state control over land. State has a stronger power to attribute lands to owners because they provide a certificate through land registration. And also, the government has a power to enforce particular crops through the policy of land consolidation, as the photo shows. So, next slide, please. So, this is my conclusion. And I'd like to one is landscape change in Rwanda indicates the two things. One is the development of agricultural commercialization. It is very clear. And also, it's a development of state building led by the Rwandan Patriotic Front, which is the ruling party and has a very strong political power in this country. And radical transformation of agriculture and rural sector has been carried out as the RPF-led state building process. So this is inseparable to political and economic aspect. So what I would like to emphasize is the political background of landscape. Thank you very much. It's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Takeuchi. Now I would like to proceed to the presentation by the Dr. Kojo Amano, visiting professor of African Studies Center, talking about foreign studies, and he is professor of Institute of African Studies at University of Ghana.
Hello, greetings from Tokyo. In my presentation, we'll contrast with the Rwandan one. Yeah, that's right. Can we go on to the first slide, please? Yeah. So in contrast with the situation in Rwanda, in Ghana, the customary land tenure is very strong. And we can see this in two different avenues. First of all, when we look at the Constitution, the rights of traditional authorities to land and royalties are spelled out, defined in the Constitution. And secondly, in the actual land reform process, customary land secretariats have been established, and these are run by the offices of chiefs who have the responsibilities of administering and registering land. In recent literature on customary land tenure, there are two buzzwords which keep on coming up. First one is that customary land is equitable and inclusive. And secondly, that is dynamic and adaptable. Here I'm going to argue that there are problems with both of these concepts. The first one is that inclusivity and equitability depend upon power relations too. And communities can also be internally divided and are subject to contestations of resources and power. And the second one, in relationship to adaptability. Adaptability can be positive, it can be negative. It depends upon what you are adapting to. And adaptability can be to dominant economic and power interests. So this also has influences the nature of land relationships and the way they represent the rights of producers or of dominant power interests. So my main proposition here is that the reforms that have been introduced in Ghana have led to declining rights for farmers in forest resources as chiefs extend their rights at the expense of user rights. And that this has resulted in the reinvention of tenure, which has commodified forest resources, enabled them to be used by concessionaires, but this is at the expense of farmers. Next slide, please. So, customary land rights are based on a framework in which farmers have user rights and the traditional authorities have allodial rights. That's the right to sell land or resources or to extract rents from non-citizens. And this tension between the two results in a process of commodification, because the chiefs can only gain benefits from transacting land resources with outsiders, but not with those within the communities, because they hold user rights. They don't have to, they have a right by being a citizen of that community, by being a member of that community, so they cannot be charged for using the land. But it's people who come externally or investors who can be charged. So the chiefs have an interest in giving out resources to people outside the community, to investors outside the community. And so what happens is that as new demands for resources develop and new resources develop, customary tenure is reinterpreted and adjusted to the new market. And this often occurs at the expense of the resource users, the original resource users. Next slide. So this has been the case in the recent history of timber. So originally there was no external trade in timber because of the difficulties of transporting it from the interior. Yeah. Sorry, that was in the interior, along the coastal areas and the rivers around the coast. There was an external timber trade in timber. But when timber trucks were invented in the 50s, and timber could be moved from the interior, then things began to change. And there's been a gradual evolution of tenure rights in which the rights of local communities in timber have declined. And this particularly happened in the 1980s in the area of structural adjustment, which promoted export-led growth and led to a huge expansion of sawmills and extraction of timber, most of which was coming from farmland. Yeah. So in the 1990s, major changes occurred in timber tenure, which redefined the rights of chiefs to timber on farmland. So now chiefs became the owners of all timber trees, which was not the case before, and they could transact them with concessionaires. And the 1994 forest policy and the 1998 timber resource management regulation both made it illegal for farmers and resource users to saw up timber into boards and to convey them from their forest locations. So this in effect gave timber concessionaires a monopoly over timber production. Next slide. So the impacts of this have led to increased logging on farmlands. Yeah. And rapidly, most of the timber in farming areas have been depleted. And not only that, the concessionaires have now gone on to logging suboptimal species, which often play an important role in fallow regeneration of the environment. I'm talking about species like Cyberpentandra, which is not a good, that's silk cotton tree, which is not a good timber tree. It's used as a core in plywood. but a lot of them have been taken out from the farming areas. And because of these changes in the legality of timber and of ownership, there are no incentives for farmers to preserve trees on farms, since the timber concessionaires can come in and destroy the farms too, and other species on the farms. And there's also no incentive to grow timber on plantations, because the farmers have no rights to sell the trees. Sorry, they have rights to sell the trees, but they do not have the right to process the trees into lumber and to convey them. So they can only sell them to concessionaires. But the concessionaires have a monopoly, so they can pay the farmers very low prices. So in recent years, teak, which was heavily promoted in the 1990s, which was selling for, it used to sell for about $50. Now timber concessions give, I think it's between $1 to $6 a tree. So these problems create little incentive for regeneration by those who have the capacity to do that. Those are those who work on the farm, the farmers, and the users of fallow products. So let's go on to the last slide now. Thank you. So although these reforms have been introduced in the name of community participation and customary rights, they tend to represent the interests of corporations involved in exports trade and marginalized farmers from forestry conservation. And the result of that has been increased deforestation and intensified timber extraction. And this is recognized in current state forestry policy documents. For instance, in a 2016 document, Tree Tenure and Benefit Sharing Framework in Ghana. A quote from this states, existing tree tenure regimes is largely regarded as a disincentive to sustain forest management. So current customary tenure regimes are not representing the inclusive rights of rural people, but they're encouraging and facilitating investors to come into communities and gain rights through investment. They're creating a market, they're expanding the market in land and timber resources. And this is leading to increasing tensions and struggles within communities over land and resources. Yeah. So that's what is currently happening. The community is becoming a site of struggle for the control of landed and forest resources, rather than being a place where equitable and inclusive rights are represented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kojo. Now, I'd like to proceed to the next presentation. And the audience, if you have any questions, please note your questions down and put it as a ask a question room and as a screen of this webinar, please. So now I'd like to introduce the next presenter. Next presenter is Dr. Teshome Emana, from his head and assistant professor, Department of Social Anthropology of Addis Ababa University. He's now also visiting at Tokyo University Foreign Studies as a visiting scholar. So if you are ready, please start, Dr. Teshome.
Thank you very much, Takanori. Hello, everyone. Good evening. As he told you, my name is Teshome Emana. The topic of my presentation today is land bill, urban land bill, competing perceptions, and access network in the suburbs of Addis Ababa. I please request you to go to the first slide. The first slide, please. Thank you very much. So from this slide, the picture, the photos on the slide, you can guess what I am going to say this evening within these 10 minutes. So I am saying that Ethiopia is now fast urbanizing, particularly the capital city. Addis Ababa is very much expanding to the suburbs of the city. As a result, the original farmers, the farmers who were using the land to produce crops for themselves, making agriculture as a means of livelihood, are now really losing their land, and land is taken by the government and transferred to the urban investors in the name of development projects. Therefore, the original understanding of land by the local community, by the farmers, which feel that land is the source of their life, is now replaced by land as any kind of commodity. Please, can you go to the next? Next slide, please. Yeah, so the aim of my study is to explain the overall picture of land market in one particular area, which is Legatafo-Legadadi town, which is 20 kilometers next to the eastern part of Addis Ababa. And the methods I used are interviews of householders, the investors, and ordinary people in the streets about what is happening in the area regarding urbanization and land markets. Would you please look at the next slide? Move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I collected the data from interviews, focus group discussions, and questionnaire, and document analysis of government offices and local agencies which are really operating around land management in general in that particular urban area. Next, please. Thank you. So this is a map of the study area. You can probably see where the place is from reading. Next slide again. Thank you. Yeah, so as I said, this is one of the key issues that I wanted to tell you today, that is the traditional understanding of the value of land, land as mother, land as source of life is changed. As in Oromo societies, the society where this urban center is found, Legatafo-Legadadi is found, is really believing in God, that God has constant and continuous communication with land. Therefore, there is always harmonious relationship between land and God. They always understand each other. And human being also talks to God to get probably prosperity and wealth through the communication of land from God. So there is communication, directly there is communication between God, land, and man. So we say in this society, when land and God are speaking to one another, then if the communication is positive, then there will be peace on earth. There will be peace on earth, and human being will be so moral and will not cause any harm to the environment, to the land, or everything that is existing on land. And there, as a result, there will be reciprocity, generalized reciprocity. That means when human being respects the value of land, the provisions of earth, then God understands, therefore gives value to this kind of respectful actions of human being, and then we feel that this society always keeps in hope, living in hope, getting better in the future. But as a result of the coming of urbanization, this assumption of land as a mother is changed, and land is considered as any commodity. Can you look at the next, please? Next slide. Yeah. Now the coming of urbanization and urban sprawl resulted in, of course, the breaking down of the strong bond between land, people, and guide relationship as a result of this urbanization process. Then government started to produce a lot of land laws, which are always in favor of the people who are having the capital to invest the land in the area, whereas the farmers are always losing their land. And in the meantime, as a result of this commercialization of land in this particular urban area, then thousands and hundreds of actors come into the land market, because land market is very much lucrative in this particular area. A plot of land in the illegal form can be sold probably at one square meter of land can be sold at 15,000 Ethiopian birr in one time. Therefore, as a result of this proliferation of different types of actors, as I say, land is commercialized, and greed and immorality, corruption, land grabbing, and unfair competition resulted in. If you look at it's not important to look at the tables, but this is just to show you that within 4 years time, a lot of land size is expropriated or taken by the government and transferred to the investors. The land is taken by the government at the rate of $0.1 per meter square, $0.1 per meter square, where it is sold. The government sold it to the investors, probably on auction, probably going to some 10,000 or 8,000 birr per meter square. In this way, the land users are the farmers. Can you go to the next, please? Leave the tables. Leave the tables. Next, please. Next. Next. Yeah. So the land is okay. Back to the next, the first, please. Back to the previous one, please. Yes, this one. You see, when land is taken from the farmers, there is no consultation of these local farmers, what to do for them, and the amount of money they will be given, and the size of land they are going to lose. So the farmers are indirectly evicted, or they lose their land by force instead of negotiating, where they do not have any negotiation power with the government. Go to the next slide, please. Go to the next slide again. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So as a result of the commercialization of land, now three groups of actors have come to picture. One group is the group that comes to the area with capital, with money to invest on this land. Many of them are real estates, manufacturing industries, and other development projects, private development projects. In the middle, we do have the middleman. I categorized. The middleman is the one who is mediating either between the government and the man, the investor, or who is mediating between the investor and the farmer who is illegally selling his own land because he is forced to do so. So in the man level, as actors, the first actors, you can find investors, even regional and federal government political officers, politicians, of course, who are directly related to the investors and then take their own share also. Whereas the middleman position is occupied by the people who are working in the bureaucracy or the land brokers, and at the bottom, the powerless man, little man, is the land losing farmer together with his children. Go to the next, please. Next. Yeah, therefore, conflict has resulted. As a result of this, farmers were not satisfied. Therefore, they started to fight against this kind of illegal land grabbing and probably very least amount of compensation payment. Therefore, from 2012 up to 2016 and even continues to 17, there was great resistance and big resistance against the government. Of course, it led to little change, I can say probably in 2018, which we are now probably a kind of reform program in the country. Continue, please, to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, as a conclusion, so after all this, what is there now? What is left on land? So the farmers who are losing land or who have already lost land are in full of certainties, and formal and informal land market is continuing, and never land is there. A plot of land can be sold by the brokers and by the investors 4 times every day, if you like. There is no control. So even though the government says land belongs to the people of Ethiopia and the state, it could not control these urban land and the land in the suburb areas. Therefore, I can say that the money is no more culturally bitter. Now it is becoming very sweet for some people. The money that is obtained from selling this land is now very sweet for some people, whereas it is bitter for the land losers. Therefore, I say, totally in general, I think finally I say, why all this coming is because there is a distorted relationship between the state and the society. The state sees itself that it is the giver, it distributes every resource, including the land, whereas the society is assumed to probably be recipient or keep silent until the state gives hands out. This is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for this night.
Thank you, Dr. Teshome. Thank you, Dr. Teshome, for your presentation. Now we have just finished the presentation session, and now I would like to proceed to the commentary sessions. We have 2 commentators. The first commentator is Dr. Denis Sonwa. He is a senior researcher of Center for International Forestry Research of Cameroon. He is normally in Yaoundé, but today he is from Douala because he is now attending at the COMIFAC seminar. So thank you, Dr. Sonwa. Are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Are you getting me?
Yeah, we can hear well. So could you start your comments?
Okay, I will be sure. Thank you. It was I listened very nice presentation, and then I thought that in this context where the webinar is focusing, I would say on land tenure reform in Africa and its implication to land restoration on the continent, it will be good for me to really say some few words again in which context this webinar is happening. I think this webinar is happening in the moment where you have this African forest landscape restoration, which is called AFR 100 initiative, in which the continent really seeks to restore 1 million hectares of degraded and deforested land in sub-Saharan Africa by 2030. So that is the big goal. If we say, let's say, landscape restoration, I think we need to go back to what is landscape restoration. It has been defined as a planned process that aims to regain ecological integrity and enhance human well-being in the forested area or degraded landscape. So you see that we have two goals. We really have, we can say, an ecological goal, but also have a social goal that need to be moving ahead in the simultaneous way. So we need to have in mind this holistical approach when we are doing the restoration, when we are responding to the degradation of land. And then the question is not to what extent previous land reform that have been listening now on the continent can enable restoration initiative, because we have been having, I would say, land reform on the continent. So how this reform currently enabling, I would say, restoration initiative on the continent. So that is one question that really came in my mind. And then if I go back to some of the, let's say, some of the special reports that we have this year, I would say on restoration, if you take the IPCC special report, I would say on land degradation, they really mention the fact that unsecure land tenure can affect the ability of people or community or organization to make change that on land to go to adaptation or mitigation. And then we know that planting tree on the land, for example, can be a measure that can be used for adaptation or mitigation. And then if you go back to IPBES report, that is Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform, Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, they produce a special report on land degradation. And then they were mentioning the fact that secure tenure can be an enabling condition for action to prevent land degradation and biodiversity loss and restore land. So basically, we have some scientific production that are showing, that are giving us the importance of, I would say, land related to, I would say, the restoration. And then since we are, let's say, in the restoration era where we really have a lot of dynamic happening globally, and then in which you have the African Forest Restoration Initiative, I think they came out with a guide on how to restore land. The guide is called A Guide to Restoration Opportunity Assessment and Methodology. And then one of the things that we need to do when we are doing the assessment of restoration is to really try to see what is the place what is the scope and availability of land in which you want to do your reforestation, and then what type of land regime are in place. So coming from that perspective, we can say what is the place of environmental consideration on the land tenure reform that are happening in Africa since 2 decades. So for me, this is one important question. What is the place of environmental consideration in the land tenure? Because from Rwanda, I hear a land reform that were taking in consideration food security, which is good. From Ghana, I hear something about the logging activity. From Ethiopia, I hear about the peri-urban activity. But could we say that when those reforms were put in place, environmental consideration were really taken in consideration or not? So I think I can stop there for the moment, allowing to others also to make their comment.
Thank you, Denis. Thank you, Denis.
Thank you.
For the moment, this is your first comment.
Yes.
Okay. I like to go to the second commentator's comments. Mercy, are you online? Mercy. The waiting for the Mercy's appearance. I like to give the presenters to reply on the comments by Dr. Dunis. So anyone can start, but the Dr. Takeuchi, can you start?
May I clarify your comments, Juni? You are talking about land degradation, and then what did you ask us? Once again clarify your point for the question?
Okay, so my general question is that you make presentation about the land tenure reform in Rwanda, in Ghana, and then Ethiopia. And then my question is, what is the place of environmental consideration? Where there's some environmental consideration when the land reform is taking place, do they take in consideration properly all the issues that are related to environmental, biodiversity conservation, carbon stock, or forest conservation? Were those considerations really part of the discussion when the land tenure process were happening in those countries?
Okay, thank you very much. As far as I understand, you're asking the main background and reason of land tenure reform of 3 countries. I think,
Exactly.
yeah. Let me talk about Rwanda, and I think I have 2 main reasons that should be considered. One is the international motivation of international community, and others motivation of government community, each government. So these are, I think, different. And international community, the motivation was promoting commercialized agriculture, which based on the neoliberal thought, through land reform, they make property rights clearer, and then this would be the basis of the economic development. The argument of Ferdinand de Soto was the main forces to to expand this kind of motivation. So for the international community, this clarifying the property rights was very important one. But each government, African government, has different motivation. That is one of my arguments. And in case of Rwanda, the situation of the RPF regime, which is post-conflict regime, is very, I think, important. Seizing the power through the victory of the civil war, the RPF seized power in 1994, and since then, the government of Rwanda repeatedly intervened to the land, and through various measures. And these land tenure reform are in line with, in the context of this intervention process. The state intervention in the land is basic motivation for the government is that strengthen the control over land and provision of the land resource for their main supporter. That is one reason. And the other one is the modernization of the Rwandan society through the intervention of land. So this is clearly closely related to the purpose of state intervention of the led by Rwandan Patriotic Front. So I think this land tenure reform in Rwanda that is the reason that I argue that land tenure reform in Rwanda is closely related to the state building process led by the Rwandan Patriotic Front. Thank you very much.
For Professor Amano, the question was, in northern Ghana, are there any particularities or differences regarding customary tenure within the context of social differentiation and natural resource extraction?
Okay.
Could you kindly reply?
Should I reply to what Denise was saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So in my presentation, I was dealing specifically with natural resource tenure. And so in the late 1990s, when new reforms were made, there were two different debates. So the first one was about the rights of communities to timber. And so the two different positions there. One was saying that, well, the farmers degrade forestry; they don't preserve forestry. So the best thing was to ensure that concessionaires were able to extract the resource and that the resource went to the external trade to bring in revenues to the state, rather than to farmers, chainsaw operators, and the urban timber merchants. And so that was what happened with the legislation in the end. But the truth is that a lot of the timber which was on farm, and during the 80s, during the 90s, about 80% of timber which was exported came from farmlands rather than from forest reserves. The majority was coming from farmlands. And much of this timber was actually preserved by farmers. Farmers deliberately preserved them on farms. Yeah. So by ignoring this has led to the decline of regeneration, natural regeneration on farms. The second debate, which was related to that, was the future basis of the timber industry, whether it should be based on naturally regenerated woods or plantations. Yeah. And in the end, the main policy in the end began to promote timber plantations. Yeah. So Ghana has gone over from naturally regenerated timber to now promoting timber plantations. Yeah, but timber plantations have not been that successful as of yet. Yeah, and I think that there's a potential for developing agroforests and fallowing system. A lot of produce come from fallowing systems. Fallow systems that goes all the way from things like shea butter, cola. So there's a lot of potential to develop a diversified range of products within following system. But the main emphasis on policy has been to promote timber production and more intensified agricultural systems, yeah, which are based on monocultures and removing fallows. So there's been a whole move in recent years the destruction of following systems and their replacement by monocrops of tree crop plantations and timber. Yeah. So I still think that this issue needs to be revisited, and I think agroforestry should still be maintained as something with the potential to be developed along new lines, which has advantage for the people and which also creates diversity in production systems and promotes biodiversity. Something which can be taken advantage in this current age of climate change and REDD+ interventions. Yeah. Okay, to go on to the second question, which was on northern Ghana.
Yeah.
Yeah, the customary systems in northern Ghana. Are they different from the south?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are two differences. Firstly, in a lot of the societies in the upper regions, they were not centralized societies with chiefs, yeah, but they were decentralized societies in which land came under the authority of earth priests. Yeah. But under colonialism, in a lot of these areas, chiefs were created or invented, yeah. And so there is a tension within, there's a contestation over what is customary tenure between chiefs and earth priests. But in some societies, like in the northern region, like the Dagomba, the Gonja, there were centralized chiefs. The second difference was that timber was not an important commodity previously, but in recent times, there's been increasing timber extraction as new species are taken up, and particularly this is of rosewood species in recent years, and mahogany. So increasingly, there are new forms of timber extraction in the north, and also similar developments happening now about reinventing a timber tenure around chiefs. So there are differences and similarities related to difference in politics, but also to the types of economic activities and extraction of timber in these areas.
Thank you. So now, Teshome-san. The general question from Dennis was that what is the background, was the motives, the behind this big this change in the reform policy by the Ethiopian government.
Right. Probably the context of the land issue that I am discussing is slightly different from what Professor Kojo and Professor Takeuchi have presented. But I know that the background for this really commercialization of urban land in the suburbs is the result of the 1995 constitution, which is still in place. The 1995 Ethiopian constitution says land is the property of the state, the peoples and nations, nationalities of Ethiopia, and it is not subjected to sale or any form of exchange. Why this provision was given in the law is clear for me, at least from the government point of view. I know that if land is sold or allowed for selling, then the farmers who are using land as a means of livelihood may be attracted by money and then sell their land to the people who have the capital, and at the end remain landless. That was the fear of the government, and the base for this law is this. But this law could not really protect the farmers from losing their land in the name of urbanization, because government itself takes land from these farmers with a low appropriation price, very low of course, and transfers it in the name of lease to the people who have the capital. They are foreign direct investors or domestic investors, of course. Therefore, the local farmers seize situation, and they themselves started to sell the remaining land to illegally to some investors also. It is a kind of probably black market, I can say, black market land sale, of course, which is not allowed. Therefore, as a result of the commercialization of land in urban areas, of course, by the initiation of the government, knowingly or unknowingly, then, of course, different actors come to play because they are attracted by the wealth that is coming from land market now. And I know these actors are starting from the government machineries or the bureaucrats who are working on land management in urban centers at all levels. And there are also brokers, land brokers, who have the capacity to go between the investor or the bureaucracy and the farmers who are powerless but sell their lands at least at a better price than what the government gives them when it takes away from them. Therefore, these brokers are called Dalala in the local language, are now becoming rich. And they also move to the level of becoming investors really by getting a lot of money out of these land transactions in the area. Therefore, I say, even though the fear of the government is to keep the land on their land, to keep the farmers on their land, the law could not really serve its purpose, and land is still under market pressure, and the price is escalating, and land is grabbed every time. This is what I could say for the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Teshome-san. So now we have still the 5 minutes or so. So I would like to ask you several questions for all of the speakers. And I have found some commonalities and differences between the 3 case studies from the Rwanda, Ghana, and Ethiopia. The one point is, I think, the problem of governance system. How the governance system impact on the output of the policy. For example, Kojo-san strongly mentioned about the chieftaincy problem. And Teshome-san, they mentioned about the middleman issue, but he didn't identify it with chieftaincy, chiefdom, etc. Dr. Takeuchi didn't talk about it. So what brought this kind of the differences in these 3 countries is one thing. Another point is about diversity issues. The almost is Kojo-san and Takeuchi-san mentioned about the decrease of the agrobiodiversity in Rwanda case, and tree species biodiversity in agroforest in Ghana. For the case of the Teshome-san, he's talking about the urban land, so it is somewhat different. But in the both cases anyway, is diversity of the land is decreasing in relation to the policy. Any kind of the measure against this situation is taken by the government or not is my question. So I have another, but we don't have enough time, so I write to you if you have any comments.
Thank you, Oishi-san. You raised two important points. But first one is the governance system, which is very contrasting between Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Ghana. And in Rwandan case, there is no chief. Chiefs are completely eliminated around the independence. So this is considered as an ethnic conflict, but chiefs are basically expelled from the country. And then when in 1994, Tutsi-led RPF came back, they did not restore the chieftaincy at all, and they established very strong state control in the country. So currently, in terms of governance, the bureaucratic control, the power of the local administration from the central to local is very clearly and very strong. And they use also the system called Imihigo, which has a performance contract between the central government and local government. And local administrators are very much controlled by the central government. And this kind of state central-local relationship is very efficient and strong. This is Rwandan case. And this is the background of the strong and rapid, remarkable performance of the agriculture policy in this country. And in terms of diversity, as I explained, the government is very eager to promote the agriculture, commercialized agriculture. It means that they are eager to reduce the species. They are rather against the subsistence economy, subsistence agriculture. But problem is that for farmers, if they produce only the crops ordered by the government, the price tends to be very low because everybody produces the same crops. So they want to produce a different one, and government basically did not allow this alternative. But I heard that in these days the regulations are really released, so there may be some change of policy government side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Takeuchi-san. So, Kojo-sensei.
Okay, thank you very much. In terms of the governance, I think the phrase you mentioned, middleman, is an important one. That the market has a lot to do with determining what happens, and often the relationship, whether it's under customary or under state, it can be still a similar relationship. And if the state works for the market, or the customary authorities work for the market, you end up with the same kind of outcomes in the end. And often the three work together in different ways, and that has always been the case. So even when the state was strong, the state still worked with customary officials. Certainly in Ghana, that was the case. So even when state-led development, customary officials were used for the appropriation of state land, and business interests were often dominant even in state-led development too. So there's not necessarily that much difference. And in terms of biodiversity, I agree with Takeuchi-san's point that it's the commercialization of agriculture, the movement towards a focus on inputs, monocultures, which is critical in determining the outcomes of preserving types of biodiversity. And at the moment, the main emphasis is on intensifying inputs and intensifying yield, and these tend to undermine biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you. So,
thank you. The last few words I have is regarding the land governance system. In the Ethiopian context, these days, we do not have really the land chiefs in Ethiopia totally. Before the 1974 revolution, when Haile Selassie was overthrown by the military regime, the land was divided among landlords. After the 1974, the military government divided land among the farmers, and the land belongs to the farmers under the slogan of land for the tillers. It is just to be land for the farmers, of course. So we do not have chieftaincy system, of course, at all in Ethiopia. Even before that, it was not there, but it was by the feudal lords, owned by feudal lords. I think the most important thing is how land is governed or administered is one. We say totally land is under the power of the state, having its own different parties. We do have 9 regions or 9 regional states. These regional states have their own power over land management, even though the power is limited, not as wide as that of the federal government. The federal government has control both over the rural and urban lands. Therefore, what we have said so far is about the middleman, the bureaucracy who is always there, having some offices, land management or land administration office in the regions at province level or at local level. Therefore, that is the way we are now really managing. It has also created opening for this land grabbing and corruption, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teshome-san. We have many discussions to be done related to this subject, but unfortunately, the time has come. I'd like to finish the webinar. Please, I'd like to say thank you for the 3 speakers and the commentators from Douala, Cameroon, Denis-san. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ciao.